Hello, everybody. It's me, Carmine DiStefano, the Bookman, and I'm here to talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe's recent edition, the series known as Ironheart. Now, I know a lot has been said about it, and not much of it has been good, especially here on this forum, but I am your Bookman, and I am here to help. Let's start off with the basics. When it comes to writing, or anything considered art, the concept is you have to earn that. You earn that by expressing a rather deep, poignant, and very thoughtful concept of society or life as a whole, and can express that in many different ways most people can't. That's what makes you an artist. That's what makes you an elite when it comes to that form of art. Of course, with the United States, the one percenters bought everything and have dumbed down the concept of art to the point where it's just people you like. And that's where the problem persists in all of this. Now, I have not watched this show. I have no interest in watching this show. I have seen a couple of scenes from trailers and what have you, and some of these reviews, but I can hear the voices being screaming, I should say, at this point, making their specific little illustrations, their points, their concepts being splurted out in so many different ways. And I always ask this question, can't both sides be right? The United States continues to act, especially here on YouTube, that the world waits in bated breath with what this specific society has to conjure up. And typically, they make it seem as if everybody on this planet is either a liberal or a conservative. But there is a lot more nuance to societies or governments as a whole than just these base concepts that like to just fight one another constantly. But here's the thing. When it comes to reviewing something, if you want to review something and nitpick it to its finest grain details, I can do that with all of these specific critics or reviewers' movies too. You can do it with every movie because the concept or show, the concept is not, as I've mentioned before, every mundane detail. It's the broad stroke of the picture as a whole. That's what it comes down to. So when you're talking about a movie or a show, it's up to those that develop these things to tell a story that has something deep in terms of its meaning. And the characters and the little decisions they make and whatever are just part of what the story is supposed to illustrate or elicit. If these specific writers or what have you can't come up with a good concept, a plot that is in itself deep, thoughtful, or relatable in any way, that you can look at and say, oh, okay, that means something, that's significant, or whatever, that makes sense, then yeah, they did a bad job, especially when it comes to motion pictures or a show like this, where the capturing of the images themselves in whatever way that they're meant to be captured, they have to tell the story in a motion picture. There's a little bit more nuance to making films or shows or whatever. It's not simply, hey, here's some people and they're really cool, right? And they're going to do some stuff that you would do. That's not what it's about. So when I hear these individuals who keep making a big deal about this, that, and the other thing related to the characters in this show, constantly talking about the things they do and the decisions they make, and it's not very smart, whatever, that's not the point. There's a story that's being told here, and I'm pretty sure none of you are really trying to get it, or none of you have gotten it at all. Now, as I said, I have no interest in watching this show outside the introduction of Mephisto in this universe, because Mephisto does sort of boast the possibility that Ghost Rider is coming about here and there. And when it comes to anything and related to comic books, obviously the comic book movies, the fans want specific characters, and Ghost Rider was one of them. And I'm not sure what the contractual obligations were to, was it 20th Century or whatever, that made the two Nicolas Cage disasters? Because everything with Nicolas Cage is a disaster, but I'm not sure exactly what was entailed in those finer points. However, they haven't introduced this character yet, but they did introduce the Hood, who in the comics is half demon, and that's all well and good. The thing is that it seems as though the cinematic universe version has taken note as to the appeal of specific characters from the sales of the comic books and sort of utilize their shows or their platforms as a means to introduce said characters like Lady Death or whatever. Now, when it comes to this particular show, to me, it's kind of like, I don't know, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I didn't care. It's kind of like the Peggy Carter series that, although I'm madly in love with Haley Atwell, had no interest in. I did certain shows I just don't watch because they just really serve no purpose to me. I just don't understand what the appeal is, and they don't seem to have really big impact on the universe itself until I found out that Peggy Carter in the What If series, more or less, was just Captain Britain, and the whole show revolved around her being just as much. But whatever it is in terms of those shows, it's one of those. I'm really not interested. I have kind of considered watching the first 3 episodes specifically to make a more in-depth and informative video related to it, but why? Everybody's talking about it. And listen, it could be a bad show. It could be the worst show ever made. I have no idea. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the issues that I'm having when it comes to those who are talking about it, it relates to the same thing that I always talk about, this woke shit. And I'm tired of the cliched reaction to everything that they consider to be woke or DEI or ESG or whatever the hell else they want to conjure up. And I get what you're trying to say, even though you're not grasping what this show is trying to say in itself. But at the same time, can you come up with something else? If the writers haven't given you an understanding as to what they're trying to say, if they haven't given you a concept that you can say, like for instance, Winter Soldier, that you're being spied on through technology, something you can relate to. They also threw in there that the United States did hire and employ the services of Nazi scientists in order to make rockets and so on and so forth. So, like, that was also touched upon. Or something like Spider-Man Far From Home, where it was about how the media influences everybody into believing anything. It's so many different aspects of Marvel Cinematic Universe films and shows, especially in the periods that they were released, seemed to say a lot more about how much they knew what was going on at that point than anything else. So if you're saying that the show isn't producing a universally understandable, relatable story or plot, or isn't really doing anything to demonstrate what they're trying to say, fine, that's a good review, that's an honest and, I could say legitimate critique. But if you're just going to keep harping on every little fucking time this young woman farts during the show, I'm sorry, I'm not going to listen to you because you don't know what you're talking about. And the biggest issue that I have is the fact that people keep screaming and yelling about what Tony Stark would do as he's Jesus Christ. He's not a real person. It was a character in a movie series. And by the way, if you loved him so much, nobody really cared for the second movie he was in. Nobody really cared for the third movie he was in. In fact, so many of these guys probably complained about how they introduced the Mandarin to be that Guy Ritchie, Guy Fieri, whatever his fucking name is in real life, screaming that he's the Mandarin while he's on fire and blowing people up. Nobody really cared for Tony Stark or his character arc, which seemed to take 3 of his movies and a couple of Avengers movies and whatever else. He's not even one of the most popular characters in the Marvel comic universe, more or less. But what was his creation? It was Stan Lee's interpretation of Howard Hughes and his magical comic book universe. That's what he was supposed to be. And if there's one thing I can agree on, it's how Marvel, both in the comics and in the shows, has this idea of, hey, what if we made the old characters new? We stole the names and everything and just made them different in some very spectacular ways, as opposed to just making new fucking characters. Characters that can represent certain aspects of society in the United States, that can speak to a broader audience than the nerd kid from Queens, the old guy from Brooklyn, and a couple of rich people or demons or whatever the hell else you have. Instead of it being this harsh dichotomy between good and evil, maybe a little bit more nuance in characters that you created and stories that you conjured up that tell more about what's really happening in society here in the United States, as opposed to just changing the faces or changing the names or changing the sexes or whatever it is that you're changing. So that I can't argue with. And again, these are valid points. But then you go and make it seem as if we have to lament and cry for a man that's not real. Who gives a fuck? That's not what makes this show good or bad. But nothing I'm going to say on my little channel of just me is going to change anything about what any of these guys say. It's not going to change anything about what any of you believe. It's not going to change anything whatsoever. I just thought that it would be a nice moment in everyone's life, a little bit of a fresh breath of air, that you didn't have to listen to somebody talking bad about friggin' Riri Williams and Marvel Cinematic Universe's Ironheart because it's woke and she's a moron and she badmouthed Tony's dog. So this was just me trying to help. You do what you want with it. I thank you all for watching. I have more for you soon to come, so stay tuned, take care, and have a great day.